pass the baton.
All right, cool. Here we go. Just clap once in front of you. Thank you.
Cool.
All right, boom.
Can you state and spell your name?
Susan Stein, SUSANSTEIN.
And then could you state your name and then what your title would be in reference to what we're talking about?
Susan Stein. I'm a teaching artist, and so I think that's what they've got me listed as. I mean, they might have it as something as professor. I think Norm does that, but we're not professors. But we are the teachers, of this class.
Cool. Oh, where's that?
And Roger's my colleague. We do it together.
Okay.
We team teach it.
Fantastic.
And it's been I'm learning a lot from him.
Oh, yeah.
He's great.
Nice.
Yeah, we're very different, and it's really great.
Why is it important to have a class like this instead it's kind of freestyle, so it's not your standard, like, study this, take a test, do this, and obviously the topics are very
No, it's
important.
harder. It's a lot harder. Doing the work is really hard. It's creating every week. And why is it important? So like I said, I came to this through Eddie Hillesum, the woman who I adapted her diaries and into a play with the director Austin Pendleton and bring that to theaters, universities, schools, prisons throughout the world. And that got me here, that got me to Norm, and it got me to prisons. And I didn't know that I would like working in prisons so much, and I didn't know the work would resonate with incarcerated people so much. Eddie is imprisoned. She's at the Westerbork concentration camp, and then she's at Auschwitz. And she writes from there. And the incarcerated people respond strongly to the fact that as her freedoms are being taken away, her inner universe is expanding. She is committed to rooting out hatred inside herself as the first and next step to making the world a better place. Norm had the idea that because she is trying to eradicate hate, that when he was working on this project, creating this project of bringing police officers and incarcerated people together, my play has 2 acts. It has her writings, which I've adapted, which are only her words, but shaped in the way that I shape them, which I just talk like talking to you. I mean, I break the fourth wall. It's a conversation. And because it's so unusual and people have not experienced that kind of theater, the second act is they want to talk back. And so we do. And for some people, they like that part better, but it's certainly part of the piece. And so Norm wanted to bring that into, this room with police officers and incarcerated people, because that's a conversation to have. And that's an important conversation, about how not to hate and how to nurture yourself regardless of the circumstances. So if you're surrounded by hate, how do you still find your voice? It's kind of remarkable because she has a good reason to hate. I mean, if anyone has a good reason to hate, it's being surrounded by the Nazis. It's pretty clear that they're bad guys, and she won't go there. She will not be dehumanized, and she will not dehumanize others and be in that process. She will not be part of that process. She is resisting that and committing herself to that. So, although he had the idea a while ago, it took a while. We almost did it a few years ago. It almost happened, but then whatever. That didn't happen that time. And then George Floyd was killed. And then suddenly things were moving in ways that they hadn't before. But Norm had been trying to do this work, get me in the room with you know, these groups that you think wouldn't be in conversation together, and there they were. Why do I think it's important? Because I think one of the men in the room was incarcerated for decades, and he's really been teaching me a lot. And his name is Yusef Jonas, and he's really been teaching me that until we are we, there's no future. That we have to see we instead of I. And this room that Norm has created seems like the only way to go, especially when you're bringing people who should be at odds in terms of what everyone says. Like, they're not going to be having a conversation. They're going to see themselves as adversaries. And that's not what's happening. And in fact, they have more in common than probably other groups that we might put in. But it's about breaking that down, those kind of definitions which end up, or labels which end up being superficial but defining. And here we are just creating together. And then you don't know who's who. You don't know who's who. Who was incarcerated, who's a cop, who's a sociologist, who's an actor. Because we're all of it at that point.
That's so cool. So when you go into prisons and you're doing this, is there any familiarity with the text that you're using and referencing and the stories?
That's a great question. So I'm not just in prisons in the United States, I'm also in Scotland, England, Wales, and Ireland. Mostly in Scotland. I've done 7 different tours of prisons in Scotland, you know, seeing the same men over and over. I didn't know I'd be so comfortable in prisons. I was talking before we started about, I grew up in the projects. So everything in my life was geared towards actually going to prison. And it was just luck and a couple of generous people that put their hand out at the right moment. So I made a different turn that I didn't end up that way. Right away in the prisons, I felt really comfortable, and I didn't know that. And I started hearing from the education people that were sending me, or the chaplains, that they noticed the incarcerated people were really comfortable with me, and they were responding in ways they don't normally respond. I think the text that we shared is the projects, and the text that we shared is poverty. I grew up really poor, and 10 years ago I wouldn't have said that to you out loud. I got a lot of shame around that. It's only been recently that I'm learning that the shame's not about the poverty. It's about a lot of other things, but I put it, the scaffolding is in there. And I think there's a way that people that have grown up that way know each other.
Do you feel that?
And that's the text. And that's the real crime. Mm-hmm. The crime is poverty. That's the crime. I mean, last night I drove one of the men that we work with home. It's a foster. And I asked him, so what's the name of this neighborhood? And he said, this is the baddest neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And I said, does it have a name? And it took him a while to tell me. And then he showed me this one corner. What a sad corner. He said, on this corner, someone's shot every day. And when I left there, it only took a couple of minutes to get back to Fifth Avenue and then off to where I was, staying. How can that be? How can that be that neighborhood is right next to this other neighborhood? That's America, and how is that? That's the crime. That's the crime. That's the crime.
Do you think, obviously it seems that your experiences directly influence your ability to connect with incarcerated people and people in these situations. Do you think that's necessary for this kind of work, or?
That's a great question. Those are good questions.
in those lines too, I have another question, kind of at a different angle, but the same thing. Is you said you were comfortable in the prisons, and the prisoners were comfortable with you pretty quickly. Was that right away? Like you walk in,
Right
they
away.
see you, and just that unspoken kind of.
It's the unspoken. And I didn't know it. I didn't know it at first. I didn't understand what was happening. You know, I have to think about that. Maybe it is necessary. I mean, but maybe for me it is, because I just, and the interesting thing about that is I'm talking about Scotland. They don't call them the projects there, they call them schemes. But it's the same thing, they knew it. You know it without saying it. It's this, I don't know, it's this way of living. Because sometimes I'm sent to work with other groups in the prisons, and the protected prisoners who didn't grow up that way. They're better educated than I was. I have a lot of shame about that. So I think for me it's probably necessary. Yeah, because I think it's wired into me, and it's why I like, even though that's not quite the right word, like working in certain groups. I mean, or in certain environments.
That's meaningful work, and that's enjoyable to.
Yeah, but I made myself teach in Princeton for a dozen years.
Right.
I mean, I got recruited to teach at a really fancy day school there, and it was really hard to do it, and I didn't want to do it. I got physically ill doing it. It took me 3 years before I felt like I had the right to walk down the hallway. I felt like everyone's seeing that I don't know where to put the knife and the fork if I sit at a table. I mean, but I made myself do it because that was the world I thought was, I want to do that world, right? That's the world. Or even the apartment I live in now. I live in a neighborhood now that I shouldn't live in. I shouldn't be strapped to the mortgage and the maintenance and all of that. But that's because growing up, I thought that's where you live, right? That's where you live if so. And that's helped me with this work. Because I understand, even last night, driving foster home and seeing some fancy cars in a neighborhood that is so sad. And I thought, right, because that car is like my apartment. You need that. You just need to no, wait, I do make it in this world, right? In some way, it's hard stuff. And the thing is, the cops are the same. That's the thing. We're in the room and we're all the same. Yeah.
You probably can't, but can you see a tangible change in the interaction and people's demeanor and how they are throughout? So you get there, you do the course and everything, and then by the end or throughout that, a noticeable change in how they interact or behave or think?
It was immediate. I have changed. I changed in the first class. Yes, we are different. I mean, you almost can't be there and not. And I don't know what it is, because we're in the Zoom box. It started in January, so almost a year ago. And I didn't think anything could work in the Zoom box. I mean, I had been working with the returning citizens already for almost a year in the Zoom box, and that was working, which blew my mind. And that's them. That's these men coming to that box with all that they've got. And it's like, okay, we're going to bring it there. All that vulnerability and rawness and commitment to change, I guess, to grow and to learn and to just be present. And I think, I don't know how the class did it. I mean, Norm started. I mean, Norm did the first piece that day. And if he's willing to put himself out there and just, be naked, in words and spirit and soul, then okay, we're all going to just, follow. And because it has changed. I don't, there are people that stop by for one class and they're changed by it.
How, so we're talking about how you've done this in Scotland a few times, and you're seeing the same people when you go back. How is that experience? The first time you don't know them, you meet them, it's this big change, and then the next time you go back, they kind of might know what to expect, but it's still impactful, and then the repeated time.
Well, there's a couple of different things actually. So one thing is there's one man who's seen my place several times because he comes every time I do it there. And he wrote, I have a book. If I had known I was going to see you, I would have brought it. I have a book that I pass around that people can write in. I now have 7 of those books. Why people write in them, I have no idea. People write long pieces in that book. It's kind of amazing and beautiful. Anyway, in the prisons, I have to bring a different book because the other books, people might be putting contact information, and there are all those rules. Anyway, he wrote, "It gets better every time, Susan." I just love that. I love that feedback. I found out, I think the 3rd time I was at Perth. Perth is a high security. I'm usually in high security male prisons. A high security male prison in Scotland. I found out what one of the men had done. Someone told me who shouldn't have told me. And I didn't know how I was going to deal with that. It was such an awful crime. Luckily, Brian, the head of education, picked me up in the morning. I mean, I had a tough night with that because I found out the night before. And luckily Brian picked me up. We had a 20-minute ride, and he said, he's a student in your class. He was really angry that this guard had told me, and he said, he's a student in your class. You don't know that. He's a student in your class. He's who he is. And I stay in touch with some of these men. Some of them write to me. But that one was hard. That was hard.
What do you think is the most misunderstood thing about people in prisons and returning citizens? Our worlds are so separated for most people.
What's the most misunderstood thing? I don't know enough about this to say. I only come from... So I'm coming from a very narrow place. The difference that I see with the prisons in Scotland compared to the prisons here, and it's not all the states. I haven't been to prisons in all the states, and I'm already going to take Minnesota out of this because Minnesota does not act this way, and I've been to several prisons there, is that the prisons in Scotland and Minnesota are committed to rehabilitation. The other prisons, and most of the prisons I go to here, are committed to punishment. I'm not sure people understand that in America, that they're committed to punishment, or what that even means. I don't believe people understand the dehumanization that's going on in prisons. I don't think they believe that we're the same people. I think they think they're others. I do. I don't think they realize that poverty's the crime. I think they think they're others. They've been locked away, they're put away. I think people think they deserve what they get. I think there's a big mushing of a lot of things together. And there's a lot of money behind making all that work because it's an economy. It gives jobs, and it's so complicated and multi-layered. I mean, we've got quite a business going on.
I just saw something the other day and it said we spend twice or 4 times as much on prisons than we do on schools, and it's a wonder why kids wind up in prison because that's where the money is.
I mean, we got it's a whole system. I mean, just the food service. You know, it's just all of it. It's all those details. I mean, it's the interesting. I mean, I'm not comparing it at all to concentration camps, although there is a connection with dehumanization. But it's all the pieces that go into making something move and something work. You know, that's the part that I'm trying to do in schools, right? Is seeing, you know, it's so easy for students to go with this idea that it was a few bad guys, right? It was a few bad guys, and just this week, class after class, I said the Holocaust didn't happen because of a few bad guys. Something that large does not happen because of a few bad guys. You know, Rwanda's not a few bad guys. Darfur's not a few bad guys. Myanmar. So it takes. There's a network. There's a lot. It doesn't just happen. There are steps. You know, we're willing to just accept this easy, and the prisons are, you know, put them away. You know, it's scary. I mean, that's the thing. And the other thing. Okay, so the first time I went to a prison, I usually am with male prisons, but the first time was with a women's prison. It was a nice prison. I knew that even though I hadn't been to any others. It was up in Maine. It was actually kind of minimal, medium, and high all at the same time because it was where everyone needed to go. But I didn't understand all that then. They called them residents there. They were not called inmates. So that already is, you know. Anyway, so I do the play. At a lot of prisons I do it twice because that lets the word get out, and then I can come back the next night or the next day. I did it on a Friday night, and one of the women asked me if I was scared. And I said, of what? Of you? And she nodded. And I said, no, I said, the doors. I was scared of the doors because I had no idea of that system, which is deliberately made to scare you. I mean, it's been set up. It's these doors that you're kind of going into the bowels. You know, it's surprising when you get through all the doors and the way they close behind you and the keys and the whole system that you actually see a window because you feel like you feel like you're so many levels underground and you're not, but it's that system. They've kind of engineered it that way. But anyway, I told her, I said the doors, and I said, and it scared me because I don't want to be here. And I know that the line is thin and I could be here. And this woman who hadn't spoken, who was sitting in the first row, said, thanks for saying that. Thanks for saying the line's thin. And I just looked at her and looked at the women who were there, and I said, people aren't scared of you when they come. I said, they're scared of how thin the line is. I mean, that's what I think we don't want to look at, right? I mean, if we dare to look at driving foster home last night and seeing that corner, what do we have to do? We have to make up all kinds of excuses, or we have to just weep. Why is he living there? Right? Why is Foster living there? I'm sorry. I wanted to take him back with me. I'm staying in the fanciest house I have ever been in my life. Why is he there and why is she there? It's too easy to say, well, they did that to themselves, because it's not. It's just not. It's not that simple. It was hard to drop him off last night. I'm glad he asked me to, because he wasn't going to. He was like, I'll take the bus. So what happens when you love someone and you drop them off there? And it's not just a stranger, you know, and it's not, like, you don't get to see it. This beautiful man who's a great writer, such a great thinker. Anyway, where were we?
How?
And we'll do it in closing.
Okay. Good last one.
I'm sorry, I probably got off track. And
Oh
I
no,
didn't
that's
mean to.
okay. So the system is built up so that the line is thin, but it's somewhat easy probably for people who aren't in a bad situation to just, like you said, look and say, oh, they did that. That's how it works. They deserve what they had. Do you think people understand how thin that line is unless you've crossed it or unless you've experienced the
No,
other side?
and I think Eddie writes about that too. She has a terrific section where, I mean, because she's at Westerbork for 14 months off and on, this transit camp in the Netherlands, and she says leading lights are here, right? Are suddenly here. They've been stripped of everything. I mean, that's one of the things that genocide does, or oppression does. It puts, you know, I mean, even in the projects, right? I mean, I was a racial minority in the projects, but you had people, African American people who didn't want to be living in the projects, but couldn't find housing other places. So this is what happens, right? But she talks about how leading lights and political people and all these people who thought they were safe are suddenly on the heath. And their silhouettes move along the barbed wire fence. And she said, how, you know, what do you need for that walk? What do you need to, you know, it takes something, it's quite a section, it's quite a paragraph of her just looking at that. We need something, because we define ourselves by that. And one of the diaries, actually, that I give the students is this young German teenager whose parents in 39 are, it's just a paragraph, but he's saying what his parents talk about at dinner, right? That's what's great about teenage diaries. You're getting to hear the talk through the lens of the teenager. And they're saying, well, I hear they're taking Jews in the Dominican Republic, but what kind of job can we get there? I think we can go maybe to Shanghai, but I'm not sure what we would do. And you're reading this, and it made me think for the first time, now that I've got the apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, what does it take to leave? Because it'll be the Jews again, right? I mean, this is how it just circles back. Right now it's not the Jews, but it'll be the Jews. If I had to leave, when do I know to go? And where do you go? And when do I give up everything I built my life? You know, that now I've got that definition, right? That's what I did. I sent my kids to that school for that, right? That was what I was doing. And this kid, you see it in there. They don't want to leave. They don't get how bad it's going to get. You know, I'm sure a year later, they're like, forget it, forget the piano, forget what job I would get. But when do you know? And that's a, so in terms of kind of finishing with what you were asking, that's a sad thought that maybe we have to all be brought to this point to understand. I hate that the language around COVID used to be, I'm not sure if it still is, that it was this equalizer, because it's not. It's not. People with money get to protect themselves in ways that people that don't, you know. But again, it was this idea that, is there something that is an equalizer?
Beautiful.